Welcome back to Alyssa's Movie Takes. If you're new to the channel, I welcome you here. I do movie reviews and TV reviews and think pieces, especially when it comes to The Chosen. And I've been doing some deep dives after the episodes of things that have made me think or things that I've experienced. And tonight I've brought on my friend Joseph. And we're going to talk about being bold, being humble, and can you be both as a Christian? Joseph Holmes is a New York City based film critic and filmmaker. He runs the Overthinkers Facebook page and co-hosts the Overthinkers podcast. So tonight he's joining me to overthink The Chosen, and the two worlds collide.
Yes. Yep.
Welcome.
Also, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the intro. Yes, I am always down to overthink. One of my great pleasures is overthinking whatever movie I've watched. I have a whole rant about the Minions and what all the deep stuff going on in that movie, which always gets a laugh from my friends. So when it has to do something with Jesus, even more so, there's room to think deeply about what's going on.
We would not be the first two people to overthink Jesus or overthink the Bible. It may just be a whole major you can
it
take,
is a
theology.
long, glorious tradition of overthinking what Jesus said and did. Yes, and we are part of that long and glorious tradition.
Happy to join that discussion. Yes. And something that I think is probably actually a fairly common debate amongst people who follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And in the show, which follows the followers of Jesus, the original followers of Jesus, they have, you have the 12 disciples, and then you have a few others who are either real close friends of the disciples or the women who are following him. And so we haven't, other than really Mary's journey, we haven't seen a lot with the other female characters, and we're starting to get more characterization with a character named Tamar, who we first met in episode 6 of season 1, yes, which is where she has a paralyzed friend, pushes to the top of the crowd, gets through the roof, and then Jesus heals her friend, and eventually she follows Jesus as one of his close followers, goes basically where he goes everywhere. And in episode 6, flash forward 2 seasons, episode 6 of season 3.
Oh wow, it's the same episode 2 seasons
there we
later.
Go.
Yes.
It's bookended.
Yes.
She and Mary Mary Magdalene have this fight, and it revolves around humility, boldness, speaking your mind, having an opinion, and being humble.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to ask you, Joseph, is there room to be both confident and humble as a follower of Jesus?
So this is really interesting, yeah, because we talked about this before this scene when we watched it, because I really did, that really resonated with me, that argument they have, because they do, like, you're right, the whole series has been sort of building up where, like, oh, Mary and what's her name?
Tamar.
No, not Tamar.
Not Tamar.
And the other girl.
Rama.
Yes. Yeah. Mary and Rama have been just sort of like oddly like curt to Tamar for like, to me, because like no particular reason that I could discern. And so it's like, but they're building up to something. Okay, fair enough. And so now we finally get the building up to it, and Rama isn't here, but Mary does. Tamar finally asks, okay, what is your problem with me? and
basically so then, straight up. Yeah.
And then Mary tells her, it's like, you are basically accuses, you were so prideful. And she gives examples of how she's always, speaking her mind, even when it might hurt somebody's feelings. She's always saying what she believes was right. She's always pushing past sort of boundaries other people set. Like she just, okay, my friend can't get to Jesus, we'll just cut a hole through the roof. We'll just, and she's constantly doing that. And that, to Mary, she articulates that as an example of pride, because it's, deciding that you are important enough, and your ideas are important enough, and that your beliefs are, you're confident enough in your beliefs that you can, push people out of the way, or not spend time considering other people's feelings, rights, your role, your place, to make yourself the center, make your ideas the center, at the expense potentially of other people. And she calls her out for that and says that that's prideful. That she says that, as sinners, as people who have been saved by Jesus, people who we shouldn't do that. We should be humble. We should be considering our words and our deeds before we just push people aside and make space for them. And this resonates with me a lot because I've been in church circles my whole life, and my dad was a pastor, and I oftentimes struggled with I've been often told by people that I have, because I acted like Tamar within church circles, that I was being prideful. I've had people in authority in churches and people, friends, who called me out and said, hey, you have the sin of pride because you're behaving like Tamar does if you watch the show. It's like, okay, here's my idea. Here's what I think you do. No, I think you're wrong. Not sensitively talking about, just saying, no, I think this is what we should do and this is what we should not do, being blunt and just taking up space and talking more than other people. But what's funny is that when I went to New York, I found that because I didn't behave that much like that, doors were not open to me. People didn't consider my ideas. People didn't have confidence that I was confident in my ideas. People didn't allow me to be a leader in situations because they saw what I had sort of been taught was humility, they saw as lack of confidence. And so this kind of debate about, how you should, whether or not confidence is pride, or and where the line is, I see this debate going on oftentimes in Christians, because the other hand, people are like, well, this shouldn't, the forgiveness of God, and this is sort of Tamar's example, the forgiveness of God should give you confidence. Just like, so Mary's saying, because we know we're sinners, we should have humility, which it's something like, hey, and because we care about others, we have compassion, we shouldn't try to push people out of the way. And we shouldn't try to say our idea is more important than the other idea and argue on that basis. But what Tamar's counter to that is, because we've been forgiven by Jesus, we don't need to, we can assume the status of a child of the king who can act like their ideas matter and their space, and they deserve to take up space in the room. And if the other person expect the other person to have the confidence in their forgiveness of God and their status as a child of God, or just simply created in God's image, to, if they think I'm wrong, to push back on me just as hard. And they should feel free to take up their own space in the same way I am. I don't think I'm better than other people. I just think this is what it looks like to act like you believe you deserve to be in the room, because you do, because of what Christ has done. So that debate in Christian circles is really interesting. And I guess, is there a middle ground? I think that my thing would be, there's a middle ground. There is a place where confidence becomes arrogance, and that's a problem. Again, pride is called the ultimate sin in the Bible. There is a way that's done, and there is a place where humility can really be masking insecurity, because that's what Tamar accuses Mary of. Is that
right? What she says is, it must be painful for you, talking about her, what she experienced, but Jesus forgave you, and you choose to hold on to it.
Right. So so the trick is, how do we discern when humility is insecurity versus humility, and how do we discern what pride is, when something is pride versus simply confidence? And that's a tricky bit of discernment, but I think that the church doesn't do a super good job. I mean, again, it's easy to kind of say the church doesn't do a good job at X, and that's that's overture. I think the church does a good job at many things, but I think one of the conversations I don't see people having deeply is how do we finally discern between those? Because it tends to be, if my personality type is more more quiet, if somebody's louder than me, I will call them prideful, and if somebody is quieter than me, I'll call them insecure. We tend to make ourselves the baseline for that, and there should be a better criteria for that.
Okay. What do you find is a helpful definition of pride?
So we actually asked this on the Overthinkers Facebook group, which is on the Overthinkers. We have the Overthinkers podcast and we have the Overthinkers Facebook group. And oftentimes on the Overthinkers Facebook group, we'll ask a question of our audience and say, hey, well, what do you think about this question? So we'll ask the question, what's a difference between confidence and pride? We had some really fun responses. One of my favorite responses was, is that pride is inaccurate confidence. I think that I am the fastest person in the room. Well, if you are the fastest person in the room, that's confidence. That's just knowing what you have to offer. But if you're not the fastest person in the room, you're being prideful because you're not the fastest, but you think you are. Paul talks about, I forget the verses, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but think of yourself with sober judgment. So that's what he calls out, is think about yourself more highly than you ought. And so oftentimes pride manifests itself in thinking that you're better than other people. And the reason that that's an easy rule of thumb, if you think you're better than the other person, is because as Christians, we have this idea that every person is intrinsically equally of value in some way. They may not contribute equally in all things in all places. Again, I do not contribute equally to enjoyment of basketball pastime. LeBron James far exceeds what how he impacts the world in terms of entertaining people with basketball, because I do none of that and he does a lot of it. So but in terms of value as a human being, the Christian idea is we all are equally valuable in some way. So a person who is prideful thinks, I have XYZ attributes, therefore I'm intrinsically more valuable than somebody else. We're like, well, that person is prideful. And of course, as Christians should say, yes, he's prideful because he's not correct about himself. He's not more valuable than other people because he's because of X, Y, or Z. So I think pride is inaccurate confidence. And then you can list things like, if you think you're more valuable than somebody else because of this, if you think that gives you rights to treat people as if they're not valuable, if you think that, but those all still, the reason that they're wrong is because they're inaccurate. So I would say pride is a good rule of thumb. And that's why so much about it is you have to test yourself and constantly being saying, okay, how, if there's something that you feel good about yourself about, which is good, you should feel good about things about it. Always test yourself about that and think how smart am I compared to other people? What do I contribute and things like that? And think, oh, okay. But then also always being like, but I'm still regardless of anything else, I'm still valuable. And, as in the King's Speech, I have a voice. My voice deserves to be heard because it is a voice. I think that living in that, but of course, that your voice is not more valuable than other people's voices. And you can get into the things of like, who's responsible in this particular instance or that particular instance to assert themselves or not assert themselves, who's responsible for that. But that's a whole other topic of like, and partly it's cultural, because again, guy culture tends to be a bit more you're responsible for your own voice being heard, and girls culture tends to be a bit more we're all responsible for making sure each other's voices are heard. And then there's city life versus country life, and so it's some of it's is contextual, which I think, which is why I really like the Tamar and Mary thing, because they're different cultures. There's like the sex, the patriarchy kind of stuff. There's the sex difference, because like she's a Jewish culture, and it's one of the few times that they actually address this aspect of the patriarchal nature of that time period. She's like, he's the man, you're supposed to be respectful to the man. And she's like, comes from a different culture where we're not told exactly what culture it is, but it seems like, okay, she's, as a woman, has a more freedom in that way. So that's an interesting aspect to this. So some of it is cultural, and you have to kind of be aware of that. But it's like, are you treating yourself as if you're more valuable, and are you treating yourself inaccurately? So I think that would be the thing about pride that I would say is, for me, the dividing line.
Okay. One of the things I think is kind of interesting is when people say, oh, I'm the fastest person in the room. And that might be true.
Yeah.
Where people start to get in trouble is like, I'm the smartest person in the room.
Sure.
Right. So somehow that characteristic automatically seems like pride. Versus
but that's interesting. But
saying,
it's
like, oh, I'm fast. Oh yeah, I could beat you at a foot race. Now,
right.
Some of that would be tone. But if intelligence somehow starts to seem like pride.
Well, listen, we had a conversation about this in our Multiple Intelligences podcast episode, because we do associate more closely intelligence with value. It's again, like, people with certain IQ scores don't get to go to college. People who have, so like intelligence. But I think to a certain degree, well, there are two things. One, if somebody says I'm the smartest person in the room, I want to quiz them on that a little bit, because of course there are multiple intelligences. It's like, okay, the smartest person in the world in math, the smartest person in the world in creativity. Like you have to be more specific with me. So my reason I kind of I kind of like I'm a bit skeptical about that, and I typically think it was pride. It's like what you probably mean by that is I'm the smartest in terms of X factor, and that's the only thing I think is valuable. Therefore, I'm the smartest person in the room, and so that's where I think that goes wrong in the accuracy scale. Secondly, if you are announcing it, then it's usually a sign of like pride if you're kind of announcing it, or actually really insecurity in some ways if you have to announce it. But if somebody says, but if you want somebody to be like, okay, I know that, in this instance, I have the most value to contribute, and therefore I'm going to make sure that I am, acting in this instance. So, like, for example, I mean, this is a really dumb example, but I just finished the latest season of Jack Ryan, season 4, and you have a character like Jack Ryan. He is so confident that his ability to gather intelligence is better than the other people he's talking to, that he's able to say, no, I am right and you are wrong, and I know it is because I've tested my abilities to gather this intelligence. And that's how he's able to save those lives, because he knows he has the right to have more confidence in his intelligence gathering abilities than the other people who are saying. So he has so that's like, you have to like, no, I'm actually smarter in this way than you guys are, and that's why I have the confidence to fight to save all these people's lives instead of just listening to you. So it's not a bad thing to know that about yourself, A, if you've actually tested it and you're not just whistling in the wind, and B, if you're using it to benefit others. Again, you're not lying about the value of human beings. So I think that, but I think it's also part of it is, again, so part of it is the problem of them if they don't test it or don't associate it with different intelligences, or if they announce it in an obnoxious way. But partly it's us, because we hear somebody smarter than us and we instantly say they're more valuable than us. And that's an us problem, because just because someone's smarter than us doesn't mean they're more valuable than us.
Right. And I was just thinking of Jesus in the episode 3 of this season, where he as Jesus, God and incarnate, is able to preach the scriptures and claim things that tick other people off. In some ways they think it's pride, but even more than pride, like the ultimate pride, blasphemy. But he has to assert the authority of what he's teaching, and he does over and over again in the Gospels and in the Chosen.
That's an excellent point, because again, for anybody else to claim the status of God would be pride and blasphemy, because the blasphemy, you're right, you put it perfectly, is the expressing equality with God, which is the highest form of pride. And but it's not wrong for Jesus to do it. Why? Because he is God.
Right. So I think that kind of emphasizes your point of, is it accurate?
Yes.
And then you see that same confidence be carried onto the disciples, especially post resurrection.
Yes.
Because suddenly they are, one of the last things that Jesus gives them is his authority.
Yes.
So I think that's often overlooked, his authority, the authority piece of Jesus, because we tend to think of his compassion and his love. He's all those things, but he really gets in trouble. He really starts to come into conflict and come into what ultimately leads to his crucifixion because of his authority, not because of his miracles. Because when he does things, he claims authority in that.
That's an excellent point. Again, I'm really good at remembering parts of the Bible, but really bad at remembering the verses that they're next to them. So it's like
modern life, right?
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Call mom. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yes, exactly. That's perfect. You give the best examples. You give the best examples to real life of things.
Yes. Thank you.
But when Jesus overturned the tables in the temple, they didn't call the Romans. They didn't call 911. What they asked him was, by whose authority do you do this? And his answer essentially was, mine, because I wrote the darn thing. And that's when they're like, okay, we got to kill this guy.
Mhm.
And so, people joke about like, man, Jesus was just such a compassionate dude that everybody had to kill him because we just can't stand a person being nice. It's like,
Mhm.
no, I mean, like, people were, annoyed that he broke the law on the Sabbath and things like that, but they didn't kill him because of that. They killed him. Well, I mean, they killed him because he was claiming the authority to have the final interpretive say on what the scriptures said, which meant, of course, that the people who made their living and had all of their power based on interpreting the Bible didn't have power anymore.
Mm. Yeah. Right. On the flip side of pride, we
Yeah.
have humility, or we even have self-loathing. So the line that Mary has in the conversation is, I think we should be more humble. I'm doing everything I can day after day. I'm afraid I'm still broken.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried I will never be enough.
Yeah.
Does that sound like someone who has fully grasped who she is in as a Jesus follower? I won't say in Christ, because she doesn't
No,
really
he's
get
correct.
rid of
Yeah.
that. As a Jesus follower.
The quick answer is no. The longer answer is not at all.
Okay.
But yeah, and I think that it does get to question, like, what is the line then, between humility and insecurity? I mean, that certainly sounds insecure, because she says, like, first of all, she says, I'm not sure in
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
which means that's insecurity. I mean, to not be sure means to be insecure in whatever your knowledge, at least, about something.
Yeah.
So the fact she says, like, but then she says, I don't know if it will ever be enough,
Yeah.
it's like that's being insecure,
Yeah.
and so whenever you say, like, um I don't I don't know if I deserve to be in the room, like, that's insecurity.
Yeah.
And you can think that, I'm not sure if my ideas are good enough. I don't know if X is good enough or Y is good. Whenever you say that, that's insecurity. Now, you may say it's valid insecurity, and that's fine. I don't judge people who have insecurities. There are a lot of reasons to be insecure. In fact, one of the big reasons that you stop being insecure is testing it.
Mm.
Testing it out. It's like, oh, like, am I a good basketball player? Well, try throwing a basketball. Like, just, you'll find out. And then if you're not, okay, well, maybe I should get better. It's
Or you can say, that's not my
exactly not
game.
not my game. Exactly, you could do one of the. It's one of those things where, if you're not insecure, let's test it out. Maybe you'll find out. It's so insecure is not like I'm putting a moral judgment on that, but that's what it is. Humility has to be something else, where you're secure in where you are, but, as Paul said, you're not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought.
Mm-hmm.
You are, I guess, I think, confidence and humility are sort of two sides of the same coin, where humility is, confidence is not thinking maybe of yourself lower than you ought, and humility is not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought. And of course,
that's great. That's a good way to put it, because we don't often think of the flip side of not thinking of yourself more lower than you ought. Yes.
So I was like, again, for humility, you test it out, like, about aspects of yourself. And of course, with it's humility if you're willing to assert yourself where you think it's necessary, but you also don't need to assert yourself where it's not. Like, we think of both confident and humble people, the people who don't need to constantly be mentioning their credentials, or like the person who we think of person as humble because they didn't bring things up about themselves that would gain them accolades. It's like, wait, I didn't know that, like, you knew Spanish. Like, where have you been keeping that? It's like, it's like, you're trilingual. Like, that would be the first thing I mention at a party, like, if I was trying to get attention. But you're just like, I didn't know that about you for like 3 years. And it's not because they're hiding or they're ashamed of it. It's just, it's not useful, and they don't need to be the center of attention for people. So we kind of think of humility that way, of feeling secure in themselves such that they don't need to assert themselves. And confident people are people that are secure enough in themselves, they don't need to be in the background.
Yeah. I would say you brought up gender differences, and this is a well, it's a fight between women written by men, but we don't need to, that's not something I need to go into right now,
Yeah.
but just
it's one of the better fights written by men in The Chosen so far.
Okay.
between women, at least in my view, at least in my point of view.
Yeah, I'm not knocking it one way or the other. I'm just saying
that's
that
the
was
reality,
a fight between two women, but then I also was like, well, it was written by men.
Yes.
But you mentioned the gender difference. You were naturally more wanting to take up space and kind of bring your argument and what you had to say to the table, and then sort of your church life sort of patted that down, and then New York brought that back. I would say this is probably more gender. I'm still more likely to, in an argument, drop it pretty quickly. Not necessarily because I've changed my mind, just because I don't like the conflict or the tension sometimes. And that's more gender. Or not across the gender, but generally more like that.
Women tend to do that more and less so than men. And you can, in the comments, you can rant to us about whether you think it's cultural or biological. But that's the reality. Whatever the reason, that's the reality.
But I mean, so for instance, like overthinkers, where it gets into a debate, I won't necessarily go all the time. I will be choosy about those kind of debates, because I don't find it as fun. And even with this channel, I don't always respond to the more conflicty ones, because I'm like, I don't want to get in a fight. And to me, it feels more like I'm fighting with you. But that's not necessarily true. It's just preference.
Well, and to be fair, in online discussions, I tend not to do it as well, because it just seems like a waste of time to me. I have to.
You can't read body language. You can't kind of come to a conclusion.
Part of it is just cultural. And there's guy culture and girl culture, and there's rural culture and city culture, and church culture and secular culture, and some of those, and it's an extrovert culture and introvert culture. And some of that is, it's not better or worse. It's just the culture of the, because again, if you get a bunch of guys together, the whatever guys are going to, that's the culture is going to be more strongly that. Again, this is one thing that women find when they start entering, and men and women both, but in video game culture, you have a bunch of women who are entering and starting playing more video games, and they see guys who are expressing their love for each other by saying, I hope you die. It's like, you abandoned us in this online game. It's like, you're a piece of garbage. And girls are going there and they're saying, this is so toxic. And some of it is, and some of it is just, this is how guys communicate and not girls communicate. And so there's that aspect of it. And then there is, like I said, in the context of this movie, there's different cultures where it's like, how a woman particularly, but also a person shows respect is by deferring space. And so to somebody who's older, to somebody who is a higher authority, whether it's religious authority, or to somebody who is of a different sex, you show respect by deferring space. And so what she hears from Tamar is, I don't respect other people other than me. That's what she hears. But for Tamar, she's just like, no, I'm showing respect for myself and others by putting what I think is right forward, and if I'm wrong, then they can tell me so. And again, one of the things what Tamar's response to Mary was, fascinatingly, when Mary was saying you were so rude to him, and she said, he asked for my opinion. I assumed he wanted us to be honest. She would have thought it would have been demeaning and a lack of respect not to be honest, because again, if you're trying to do something, you need feedback. I want, when I have my friends of mine read a script that I'm writing, I want them to be nice, but I also want, and not jerks, but I also need them to be honest, because at the script stage is the easiest time it is to fix whatever problems there are. And so some of it is just be sensitive to other cultures, that might be, in there, but then also looking at, what's driving what you're doing. Because, one of the things I thought about, I was thinking watching, because I watch Muppet Christmas Carol with my family every year. Because it is,
me too,
the greatest Christmas movie of all time, greatest adaptation of Christmas Carol of all time, which is no longer cool and edgy to say. I was saying it back when it was cool and edgy.
Okay, we'll give you that credit.
Hipster cred. When Tiny Tim says, God bless us, everyone, I remember listening to that and being like, that is one of the most arrogant things a human being can say, that they are entitled to speak to the God of the universe and, half ask and half sort of demand, by the way it's said, for him to bless us.
Mhm.
That is an arrogant thing to say if God hasn't already said that we're entitled to that. So I think it's sort of where I've helped. A really good rule of thumb is, take up space for yourself and then give space generously to other people, and do both of those things. Say, I have a really good idea and here's why it's great. And then also, whenever somebody has an idea that you think is great, you loudly point to them and say, that's a really good thing, and elevate them in that regard. So elevate yourself and other people consistently. And then also, because that's the truth, because God says you're valuable and other people are valuable. And so it stops being pride at that point. If you think I'm valuable, but I also think everybody else is valuable too, then it stops being pride. It starts being confidence. And then when other things, like if you're going to criticize people, or you have to then take criticism in a really open way. And then you have to, if you're going to tease other people, you have to make fun of yourself. You have to do those things. So always make it corollary. What you should do is be emotionally intelligent and receptive to feedback. So it's like, oh, this is a person that needs more encouragement. And like if I'm arguing with them, I kind of have to argue on their behalf as well as my behalf.
Okay.
Then notice that if that's a person you do that with, okay, take that data in and adjust yourself to that person. And just have that kind of emotional intelligence to know what environment you're in and who you're with, so that you can do that. That's how I have found to try. And again, sometimes I make mistakes. Again, we've had these discussions recently where I came on too strong, and the person was like, "You are full of pride," and I was like, "Okay, this person it was too much for that person to handle," And it's but sometimes it's just their problem, and it doesn't matter what emotional intelligence you have. You do that, but make that a goal to be confident and emotionally intelligent, so you know how to adjust yourself so that you can include other people into the realm of value in the community that you're in. That's the best that I've come up with so far.
Yeah. I think that works pretty well. And I think one of the reasons why Jesus gives us that verse about forgiving 49 or 7 times 70 times 7 is that we're all on this learning process, and we shouldn't judge ourselves by our worst moments, and sometimes not judging ourselves by our best moments either, but that we kind of can over time learn skills better, and probably you have one tendency or another, right? You either probably lean more toward the confidence, and then your vice would be pride, or you lean toward the what we'll call humility, or demure, to be more demure. And then
that's a nice Jane Austen-esque word.
Thank you very much. My appreciation's coming out. And then you would lean more toward insecurity as your vice. So and that's just probably.
How about you? What if your the things that you've learned to try to balance those? Because you say, because you are somebody who does try to avoid conflict, because you see it as just fighting, not getting anywhere positive, generally speaking. But you also are putting yourself out there with all of your opinions, and talking to hey, Dallas Jenkins, here's how I think you got PTSD, sexual assault related PTSD wrong.
That's true.
And you're saying it.
I don't mind fighting with him because I've never met him.
Dallas Franken Jenkins, who's one of the big stars of the Christian world. So you have the Tamar-like confidence to believe you're entitled to do that. And part of it is that you say, look, I have experiences, Dallas, that you don't have, certainly in terms of being a woman. And so you're able to say, here is some legitimate reasons why, but you also just are able to have that kind of confidence, even though, again, you are a non-confrontational person. So I guess, again, I've told from my perspective how I try to do that. So how do you do it?
Yeah. So I would say my experience of being more Tamar-like when I was young was true. And not so much church culture, but recognizing that my family, and especially my mom's side, I'm I hope this is not meant to be offensive, but on the other side, they're all like get pleasure out of being the smartest person in the room.
Ah,
Like that's the game they play.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so right, it's which there's the debate, which the
Right, yeah,
having
yeah.
the fun with the argument, but with
Yes.
like the four phones of like who was right about what this actually happened in this
Yes,
movie, right? That
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing, where you couldn't Google it right away.
yeah, yes.
So then I think that I thought that that was not, it's certain point it became not as fun to me. And so I
Yeah,
sort of liked more of the counselor type, just listening and peacemaking.
yeah.
And so I still think that I like that more,
Sure.
of hearing more what other people have to say than sometimes what I
Yeah.
have to say, and just listening.
And I have to say,
So
I was just to say, you're really good at that. You're really good at, like, in our conversations together, you've done a really good job of, like, when I've said something, asking me really good questions that help me bring out and even discover the things that I didn't realize that I was saying. And then, giving, like, then eventually sometimes you say, but pushback XYZ,
mhm.
what about this? Have you thought about this? So that's something that you're really good at. And that's really valuable.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and so then I think it's just certain points, certain issues where I find that I'm like, no, I think this is important enough
Hmm.
to take a stand on and hash it out a bit.
Yeah.
Especially with its people that I respect and love,
Hmm.
like both of those things. Because I mean, I respect Dallas a lot. I think he's done amazing things in the Christian media world.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, when I watched that one episode that you brought up, I was like, this is really important to
Yeah.
show how Jesus would respond, and it doesn't seem like he's doing it well.
Right.
And part of that is based on my own experience. And like this is somewhere where the church gets it wrong enough that we need to get
Yeah.
it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
that's one issue. There's a few other issues where it's just like, no, this is a matter of life and death, or
Yeah.
misunderstanding this will lead to pain in other
Right.
people. So there's certain issues where I'm like, no, I'm willing to just take my stand on this.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that in our friendship or another
Yeah.
friendships, but I'll use ours in our
Yeah.
friendship, I think I'm like, I know that I'm not going to change my opinion on this. You're probably not going to change my opinion, your opinion on this, but it's okay for us to hash it out
Yeah.
some. And sometimes it's like, I don't need to shove it down your throat and you don't need to
Right.
shove it down mine. But I don't like the feeling of when I'm shoving it down somebody's throat,
Yeah.
but I don't mind learning that within relationship it's
Yeah.
okay to disagree,
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
within friendships and siblings and parents,
Sure.
all
Yeah.
those
Absolutely.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, because you saw it, experienced it as a game of dominance, very, early on, at least as it appeared to you. Again, it
Yeah.
wasn't about getting
And
at
it may not
truth.
have been, but that's how it
Yeah,
was
but that's
perceived.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and it was not a thing of like getting at the truth and improving anyone. It was just a constant loop of who's won this game.
Yeah.
And so you do have sort of a bias that we don't get at the truth through fighting. We get at the truth through kind of counseling, and kind of we get at understanding and loving each other that way. And that's a bias, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. And it's, but now but it certainly has leaned you in a direction, I think, toward your gifts that are good. But I think this is interesting, is like when it is something where that saying the truth, even if it's not nice, is important enough, it's like you're willing to like step out, and that's a really good thing.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be, have you grown, and it's fine if you say no, have you grown to be able to see other people engaging in an issue in a different way than your more counseling method as potentially not toxic?
Yeah. Yes. I think learning what the difference between, especially gender wise,
Sure. Yeah.
helps me understand that. I was listening to David Wood a while back, who was a
Hmm.
YouTuber who was popular for a while. I don't know if he still does it because I haven't seen it in any of his videos lately, but he said he started out by doing more of the kind of traditional, milder
Yeah.
evangelism, more friendship based evangelism with
Yeah.
Muslims, and he wasn't getting anywhere. And the
Ooh, interesting.
reason was, and this is mostly Muslim guys, that was just kind of what it was,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
but they had more of that Greek philosophy idea where it's like, no, you come together,
Right.
you bang it out, and kind of
Yes.
the best idea wins.
Right.
And they saw it as a weakness if you kind of approached it with gentleness and
Yeah.
and quietness and invitationally. They wanted to know
Fascinating.
that you really believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And anything less than that, then it would get heated. But he got a
Yes.
lot of people to actually come to Christ because of
Yeah.
that
Well, that's
method.
fascinating. Oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Do you think that you would be able to recognize, like, again, if you're in the Tamar Mary situation, would you be able to say somebody who is behaving like, um, Tamar, and be like, okay, they are just doing it differently, than I would, but that's still okay? Do you think that you kind of would be able to recognize that?
I think so. I mean, I think what's tough to write about women and
No.
what's tough to be in a woman is the sort of the catty feel that can just
Sure.
come. Because like in that situation, I think it was a very well written fight in that it's not super catty and they do get
Yeah. No.
somewhere, but it could
Yes.
have easily just gotten mean girls ish, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the female type dominance
Yep.
stereotype is more the queen bee, which
Right.
isn't so much like the I'm smarter than you, but it's more the you're stupider than me.
Okay.
Or
Sure. Sure. Sure.
you're not as in as me. So the
Yeah.
fight's becoming about being in.
So
And
yeah,
this wasn't
socials.
really because this
Yeah.
wasn't really so much about being in. It
Yeah.
was about style and
Right.
approaching Jesus and approaching other people.
Yeah.
Then I thought that was
It,
really
it was less about
well written.
personalities and
Yeah.
more about the content,
Yeah,
which,
and more about the content. And I thought that was great in terms of just a
yeah.
model for the church to get it right,
Yes,
right? Like if
exactly. Yes.
like the church gets it wrong, okay, model
Yeah.
for the church to get it right is because there's so many women in church, it can
Yes.
become silence and you don't address it until it's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm leaving because she thinks this about me, but
Yeah.
like, or
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
leaving
Yeah.
because they got that red carpet that I didn't right? Like you just sort of sit on it instead of
Yeah.
having the conflict. So that's where I see it
That's really
um
good.
because if you don't have the conversation in a setting where there's tension and they're addressing
Yeah.
it, but they're not addressing it based on like stupid characteristics, but actually what's
Yeah.
going wrong,
Yeah.
that was a very helpful
And
conversation.
the thing is, again, for men and women, one of the difficulties that is tough is, I'm not going to say this is unrealistic, but it's so uncommon for Mary to admit what she admitted,
Yeah.
because most people are like, if I say this out loud, that I still don't think I'm good enough.
Yeah.
You know, they know that that's the wrong thing to think, even though that's really what is driving them. And so
Yes.
they're not going to actually say that out loud to people for it to get addressed. So that's why you say why there's this conspiracy of silence, is we don't actually say the things, because if we did, then we would say something about us we don't want other people to think of us. And so again, it was a really good model that you said, like, she actually said what was really on her mind. And that's
Yeah.
such an important thing, and such a rare thing, that is how it should be done, because if the issue can be addressed, then it can be solved, and
Right.
or at least, even if not solved, it can be improved upon, and it can
Uh-huh.
be, yeah, so that's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I'll just end with this sort of same thought pattern of where it goes in the scene is it starts with them fighting and both saying what's on their mind and both really what they see as wrong in the other.
Yeah.
And then because they've been vulnerable with each other and basically Mary crosses a line where she's basically like, you don't know anything about suffering, which is like Tamar's cue to be like, are you kidding me? And then
By the
she
way,
cut.
tip: if you ever say somebody else you don't know anything about suffering, you're probably going to lose the fight.
Yeah, because they're gonna be like, hold my beer, or hold
Exactly.
my
Yes. Not that I'm
hold
speaking
my
from
whatever
personal
first
experience or
century thing they
anything.
would hold
Yeah.
hold
Yeah.
my olive oil. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Oh, the olive oil.
I know, sorry.
Yeah.
But so then Tamar
Yes.
is vulnerable
Yeah.
and they're able to have a sort of emotional bonding moment. And then at the scene ends with, okay, let's go deal with the olives.
Yes.
Right. So, which is like the thing that they couldn't get together on anyway. And it had just sort of stalled. It had come to a head, but it stalled. So they have their catharsis and then they're able to move forward and do something productive.
That's
So I
amazing.
just think that that's a nice scene in terms of it moves the story
It really is.
forward.
It's a really good scene.
Yeah. So
I
it's a
will
good
say this
scene.
also to that, and then I'll let you finish because this is your show.
Thanks.
Is that thinking about being the Tamar in a situation like that, whatever situation or where there's a conflict. Because what Tamar had to do is she had to ask, "What is your problem with me?" And the thing is, in order to start all that process, she had to be willing to hear what someone's problem with her was. And oftentimes we don't want to start those conversations because we're afraid of what the other person's going to say about us, whether it's going to be true, whether it's going to be too painful to hear. But I think they are showing accurately. You have to have the confidence and security. So you have to be confident enough and secure enough to be able to hear the bad things people have to say about you, because that's the only way a redemptive scene like this happens.
Yeah, right. I agree. And I think that that's a pretty good take on the scene.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to do this again after the finale.
Yes.
So the way that they're doing the finale, you should look for tickets near you now. So they're going to have the finale on the 2nd and 3rd, which is a Thursday and then a Friday. And then they're also going to just normally air the episode on the 5th and then on the 7th, because the Super Bowl Sunday won't be on a Sunday, it'll be on a Tuesday that week. So they're going to squish it all in. And at some point that week, Joseph and I will be reacting to the finale, because it's the end of the season, and he will have a review up on Religion Unplugged.
Yes. So if you want to see my regular takes on movies and faith, I regularly write for Religion Unplugged. I have a bunch of chosen stuff on there, including the first season. There is an interview with Dallas Jenkins I do. So yeah, I already have a review for the season 3 opener, because that was in theaters as well. But then for this a new one, I will have a review up, and then I will be on your show again, and then you're also going to be on the Religion Unplugged podcast to discuss so as well. So it's just going to be a lot of Joseph and Alyssa content.
A wealth of the chosen.
Exactly. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, me too. All right, so that's my take on The Chosen, season 3, episode 6, with this fight between Tamar and Mary Magdalene. And I look forward to talking with you soon. Let me know what you thought of the episode and what you think about this whole pride, humility debate in the comments below.